in a lot of ways, today's world is better than it has been for the vast majority of the people living in the world than it ever has been in human history. And yet we're bombarded from all around us with how bad everything is. And we start to believe that. We start to think that. And if you have no hope for the future and you don't know what's coming, as recorded in the Bible, it can really get you down. It can really make you think that there's just nothing coming, and this world is awful, it's horrible and terrible. And it really is not. The world that God's created, even though man has corrupted it in vast ways and found cruel ways of waging war, the world itself is still amazing and incredible and so good. And there's so many positive things out there. Today, we're just going to look at a little bit about how society feels in the UK today, and then just look a little bit about what the kingdom's going to be like, the kingdom on earth that's soon to come with the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. So, state of the world today. You can see here, for example, this is what we're talking about in terms of the way things are today compared to the past. This is a chart found in a really interesting website called Our World in Data. And they got all kinds of really interesting statistics there. You can see how today, in modern times, there's relatively very peaceful. There's not many major wars going on, and even the ones that are going on, it's not like it has been for pretty much all of human history in terms of war, diseases, and starvation. There were some nasty peaks, as we know, in the 20th century. But since that time, by and large, it's been quite a peaceful world, quite not a lot of people dying compared to the past. But we don't think of this way. There has been a lot of conflicts going on between people, between their own government, a lot of revolts and people unsatisfied with the way of life. Less wars and things like that than there used to be, but there's a lot of people not happy with what's going on with the world. This is just a map of places in the world where there's a lot of fighting going on today and problems, whether it's the nation going after a part of its own people, or whether it might be a war itself, an actual war going on between two countries. There's not too much of that these days, but there still is some problems. This is a measure they call the Global Peace Index, and it's kind of a bit hokum, if you know what I mean. Like, it's kind of fake, a bit made up. But there is a general idea of which country, where it's the nicest, most peaceful place to live. And you can see that, well, we live in the blue zone here in the UK, and it's some of the more peaceful parts of the world. Canada's even more peaceful. So that's great too. But you can just see that the vast majority of the places where we are, where we interact with, are extremely peaceful places. Unless you go to some of the more war-torn areas of the world, you don't experience this, except when we turn on our TVs. And then it seems to be everywhere and all around us and about to get us. But you can see that really it's quite a peaceful time we live in. Just a little record of the war in Ukraine. This is one of the only real active areas in Europe that is sort of nearby where there's a real war going on. And it is a particularly bitter war, isn't it? We've seen a lot going on there in the last few years. Just see if this works. This is a little clip. This is what we see all the night on the news. This is a clip from President Biden. They asked him, what would happen if Russia uses banned weapons in Ukraine? What are you going to do about it? So we'll see if this clip works. Oh, hold on a second. I have to turn up my volume. Let's hope this doesn't cause the system to freak out. It might. All right, let's skip it then. Anyways, do you know what he says in answer to that? He only says one word. Don't. So, in one sense, you can think when President Biden said that, what if Putin uses weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine? And he said, don't. And in one way, it was kind of a weak answer. But in another way, it's a very powerful answer because he's keeping everything back. And the massive military might of the US might be used in this case. And he's warning them. He's keeping his cards to his chest. Anyways, we'll skip through that. There's the ongoing problem right now that we see on the news between Israel and Iran. It's very concerning for many of our brothers and sisters. We have in Bristol Down End, we have a fair number of refugee and former refugee people from Iran. I think we've had about 20 over the last few years, and right now we have about 5 or 6 who are there every week. Most baptized, but there's 2 new people who just joined up who are just learning the truth. And when this really kicked off the other week, when Iran shot all those missiles at Israel, they all came back. We hadn't seen some of them for a few weeks, and they all came back, and they were all wondering, what's happening? What's going to happen to does the Bible have any say on this? When is the kingdom coming? And they had a lot of worry about this. So there's definitely worries from that perspective. This was a poll that was done, I think, earlier this month. What do people think are the worst problems in the UK today? What are we worried about? Where does there seem to be no hope? And then people think they just can't afford to live anymore. Nobody makes enough money and things cost too much. And we may have some empathy with this. The NHS, if we get sick, can we see a doctor? Is it going to take us 3 months to get cancer surgery or treatment if we need it? The economy in general, is it really bad? Housing, how is anyone going to afford to buy a house? We get bombarded all the time with things about the climate change and the end of the world and all this with the environmental collapse and things. And there's crime everywhere and everyone's getting stabbed on the streets. This is what people are really worried about. But if you turned off your television or you stopped going on news sites on the internet and you just thought about in your own life, in your own family's lives, in your friends' lives, in your community where you live, how much of a real problem is this, especially for Christadelphians, for believers in the Lord, Jesus, and the kingdom soon to come? Do these things, how much do they really affect us in a real way? And I think you find that they don't really affect us so much as we worry about them. So there's this impetus to make us worry about things by modern media. So here's an example. We worry all the time that how are we going to afford to heat our houses in the winter? And there was a problem in the middle when the war first kicked off between Russia and Ukraine. It went through the roof, didn't it? For about a year there, it was very expensive to pay for fuel to heat our houses. But it's kind of gone back to the way it was before. It's still slightly more expensive, but it's not really that much more. And we don't think about this, that nobody talks about these things on the news, how prices have kind of come back down almost where they were before COVID even. We just don't think about it. It's not talked about. Here's another thing. People worry so much about the economy. However, and it was bad there. It's been a tough year or two. But things are kind of creeping back up. By this time next year, they calculate that we should be kind of getting back close to where it was before COVID. We should have around the same amount of disposable income. People will be better off, but it just isn't talked about very much in the news. It's more a lot of worries for some reason. This is a really interesting graph to look at. They measured back, I think this was in 2016. So the chart on the left is symptoms of anxiety and depression across different age groups before COVID, so 2016. So you have amongst teenagers and young adults, 16 to 24, you have rates of anxiety and depression somewhere around between 10 and 15%. Now look at now, after COVID, that skyrocketed to anxiety and depression now amongst that same group. It went up from 12% to 67%. Imagine that, 2/3 of young people today are anxious and have depression. And it went like this across the board. It doubled in almost every category, even in our most elderly group, symptoms of anxiety, depression. These are those people who we never had depression and anxiety in their lives. In their society, they didn't talk about it, or they didn't have it. I don't know which. My grandparents seemed to be pretty tough, and nothing ever really seemed to bother them. But even in that group now, there's massively more people worried. And it's interesting to think about. If things haven't really gone that much worse, or they're improving, why are we so worried? Why are we so anxious? And I don't have a total answer for you. Violent crime is apparently rising, perhaps, maybe not. People are worried about this. Nobody believes anything in me anymore. And this may be getting to one of the reasons about why people are worried so much. If these supposed things are happening, or we're being bombarded with the message that the world is so bad, nobody anymore has anything to fall back on, to think about, well, I don't worry about that anymore because I have my faith. The vast majority of British people today don't identify with any religion at all. They have no hope in a real sense, nothing at all. And this came from the Humanist UK website, so they're very happy about this because this is what they want, right? They don't want people to have religion. They think this is progress. It's even higher amongst young people today. Here's another interesting graph. The size of the church shows you the change. So the blue one is what it used to be in 1983 versus how it was in 2014, so about 10 years ago. And I think it's gotten worse since then. The church of no religion has gotten massive, and all the churches of the established religions, so I think other Christians, has stayed the same. So hopefully that's talking about us. But it's just an interesting thing to see how things have changed in terms of religion. All right. So for the world, we've established everybody's worried and anxious and depressed, but there is a hope. And we know what this hope is. It's taught in the Bible. That's the main source, the only source we have for understanding what this kingdom is that's coming to the world. So we're just going to look at a little bit in the remaining time this afternoon or this morning, just to think about what it's going to be like in the kingdom. What are these problems people are worried about today, and how are they going to be different in the kingdom? So today we think that the sea is raging. This is a Bible symbol, isn't it, for the nations? We see prophecies and poems and songs written in the Bible about the sea being tossed to and fro, and it's a Bible symbol for nations being at war and being in turmoil. So, for example, if you flip over to Luke chapter 21, this is a really good example of this. In Luke 21, verse 25, and Jesus, in his prophecy there, the Olivet prophecy, when asked about what is it going to be like when you're going to come back, what's the world going to be like, what's the sign? And one of the signs is that it says, there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, upon the earth distress of nations and perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. And it's not talking about literal sea and the waves, is it? It's talking about the nations of the world having a real, just a problem. Being in turmoil is a great way to look at it. There's just a little picture of a boat in a very rocky sea. And I know there's a lot of fishermen here in the audience, and I don't know if you've ever been caught out when a storm comes up. It can be pretty scary if you're in a small boat. And I think it's that idea that the Lord's talking about here when he discusses this. The nations, the small nations, the big nations are going to feel like this is what it's like. They're all in turmoil just before the Lord returns and the kingdom is set up. And in the kingdom, the way that it is today will be completely different. Psalm 89, verse 9. It says very clearly that it's going to be so different in the kingdom. There's not going to be any of this turmoil. The nations won't be at war anymore. Thou rulest the raging of the sea. When the waves thereof arise, thou stillest them. And when Jesus comes back and sets up the kingdom, this is one of the most amazing things we're going to see is finally the kingdoms of men are going to be at peace, a real peace, a full peace. And if you got your Bible to Psalm 89, just flip over a few pages before. Psalm 65. Verse 7, same sort of idea. Thou which stillest the noise of the seas, the noise of the waves, and the tumult of the people. And this is what Jesus is going to bring back when he comes. And another one in the Psalms, again, Psalm 107, a really interesting passage there about what it's like and what the nations are truly like, and the way that God sees them in a personal level. He commandeth and he raises the stormy wind, which lifteth up the waves thereof. They mount up to the heavens, they go down again to the depths. Their soul is melted because of trouble. They reel to and fro. They stagger like a drunken man. They are at their wits' end. And remember, this is talking not about waves, but about countries and nations. Then they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he bringeth them out of their distresses. He makes the storms calm, so that the waves thereof are still. Then they are glad because they be so quiet. So he bringeth them unto their desired haven. And that's the whole world's going to be crying out for God to solve the problem we're in. And it will be kind of like this, a beautiful picture here of the sea at peace. And that's going to be the state of the world in a very poetic way, thinking about it as if it was the ocean. So when Jesus comes back and establishes the kingdom, apologize for way too much on the screen, but if you turn in your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 2, this is where this all comes from. And I'll just read a couple verses here. And it's a really peaceful, amazing time when Jesus comes back to save the earth, to set up the kingdom. Isaiah chapter 2, and we'll just start reading at verse 2. It shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He'll teach us of his ways. We will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So for any of the younger ones in the audience, do you guys ever see where this last words are written today? Does anyone know what building in America they're written outside of? No. This is written just outside the United Nations building in New York. They took a bit of this passage out. They forgot all the bits about God and the Lord Jesus and the setting up of the kingdom, but they think that the world is trying to think that the United Nations is how to bring about this passage. It won't, and it never can, but that's the idea. And in fact, the world uses these passages. They would love to have this come into being so much. And yet because of flesh and sin, this is never going to happen. But years ago, after the Cold War ended, America and Russia, they started to decide we need to do something about our nuclear weapons stockpiles. We have so many nuclear weapons, absolutely tons of them, thousands and tens of thousands of them, and they're now completely useless. Well, they always were, but what are we going to do with them all? We can't afford to keep maintaining them and keep testing them and things like this. We need to do it. So they got together and they both put inspectors in each country. Well, this was back in the 90s where they were still sort of friendly for a few years. And they decided to massively reduce their stockpile of weapons. And they called this the Plowshares program. And what they did was they took nuclear warheads and all the nice uranium and plutonium and things out of that. And they set up 2 factories, one in Russia and one in America, and they converted this into fuel. And they would sell this on the open market. And there was so much of it that it depressed world uranium prices for about 20 years because it was cheaper to buy it from this program than to mine it from mines in like Canada or Australia or Kazakhstan. But again, they're looking at these. It's just interesting how man looks at these Bible passages and thinks, we can do it. We can make this peace happen. And they won't until the Lord comes back. And this is the picture outside, a big statue on the lawn outside the United Nations of someone taking a sword and beating it into something you'd use in an old-fashioned kind of farm. And it's a direct quote from that passage in Isaiah. Right. Now, here's another really interesting thing that I think is important. As believers, and if we want to try to get some peace today, we know the kingdom's coming in the future, but our faith can actually help us today. It can give us a measure of peace. We can send our worries to God in prayer, and He's going to give us some peace. Look at this. There's a few passages. You don't have to turn them up if you want. I'll have them on the screen. But 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7 says, if you're worried about something, if you're stressed, give it to God. Cast your care upon Him because He cares for you. God doesn't want you to be worrying all the time, especially about these kinds of things, which there's nothing you can do about them anyways. So put them back to God. Send them to God. Let Him take care of them. And He's definitely going to take care of you. Jesus promises, says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Praying to God and giving these worries up to Him can really help. It sounds kind of trite, but it really does work to give them up to God. Let Him take care of them. And Psalm 4, verse 8. I don't know why sometimes we worry so much as we're trying to get to sleep at night, but for some reason we do. And this is a great time to pray to God as you're going to sleep. Give up your worries to Him. Say them out to Him. Give them to God. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep, for Thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. How true that is. Well, what's another thing that's amazing about the kingdom? Well, people are worried today about injustice. Society seems to be crumbling to them. They're worried about how there's no justice in the world, crime's going crazy. The police are all corrupt. The governments are all corrupt, and no one's thinking about justice. And we know that in the kingdom, whether that's true or not today is up to you to understand. But in the kingdom, there'll be true justice. With righteousness shall Jesus judge the poor and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth, and He will smite the earth. In Isaiah chapter 11, there's a whole passage there which talks about what it will be like to have a true justice system that's actually perfectly just and will help people who need it instead of the way it is today. And this, of course, I think is the ultimate end of everything, isn't it? When the kingdom comes, this is our ultimate hope, the earth to be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. The knowledge of God, the knowledge of the glory of the Lord is just so limited today, isn't it, society? And it's why we're all worrying about everything. The slide earlier, looking at how nobody has any faith anymore and nobody has any belief in anything, it makes them worry. There's nothing else for them. They turn on the television, it's all bad news. They go on the internet and look at the news, it's all bad. It's just worrying. Somebody's making money off the fact that we're worrying about these things. But if the earth was filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea, none of this stuff would matter, and we would again have hope. One of the big things I think they really are pushing in schools today is to try to get kids to be really anxious about the state of the environment in the world. And I know for years we've talked about this in schools and in society, but for some reason now they're just hammering the kids with this worry that the world's about to collapse. And we can talk after about whether, the facts of that. But in the kingdom, it's not going to be that way. Whatever it is today, whatever is the reality of the situation in the kingdom, it's going to change, isn't it? The world's going to become like it was in the Garden of Eden. The entire world. They shall say, the land that was desolate is become like the Garden of Eden. Imagine these places today that are like deserts where there's nothing living. And they're saying it's going to get worse there. And in the kingdom, it's going to be like a beautiful garden everywhere in the world. All of the farmers will be making food like you wouldn't believe. It would be just amazing how it's going to completely change in the kingdom to the way it is today. Now, for those of us who have been baptized and we believe we're going to be in the kingdom as saints, we have an amazing hope, don't we? But sometimes you might think about, well, what's going to be like for the regular folks who have, up to this point, had no knowledge about Jesus, don't know anything about the gospel. Well, the kingdom's there for them as well in a different way. The kingdom, what it would be like for a mortal person to live in the kingdom? And Isaiah 65 says one thing that's going to change is physically people are going to be much, much healthier. And there's a lot of capitals in this quote, but never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. He who dies at 100 will be thought a mere youth. He who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. So one major thing that will be changed in the mortal people who live in the kingdom will be their health will be changed. They'll be able to be living a lot longer than they are today. Very, very healthy. That's an amazing thing for people to think about when, it's so different than that today. So benefits for everybody. And for us, who we consider we're going to be what the Bible calls the saints in the kingdom, we're going to be changed, aren't we? We won't be these fleshly mortal bodies anymore, but powerful, immortal bodies. They will hunger no more, neither thirst anymore. The sun won't light on them, nor any heat. You won't be affected by being burnt by the sun or anything like that. The Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, shall lead them unto the living waters, fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. We're going to be princes. We're going to be in the kingdom, princes ruling in judgment. And it's going to be a fascinating amount of work for saints in the kingdom. So much to see and do. The work of the righteousness shall be peace, and the effects of the righteousness, quietness and assurance forever. Think about all those mortals living in the kingdom, how much care they're going to need. How things are going to be taught, how things are going to change so much. There's going to be so much amazing, wonderful work in the kingdom for us to do to bring about the Lord's will. Numbers 14, verse 21. At that time in the kingdom, the hope will be back, because as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord.